Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and imagine this. You're cleaning out an old drawer, maybe sorting through a jar of loose change that's been sitting untouched for years, and suddenly your fingers brush against a quarter from 1989. Nothing special at first glance, just another piece of pocket change that's seen better days. But what if I told you that this exact coin, this seemingly ordinary 1989 Washington quarter, could be worth a staggering $111 million. Yes, you heard that right, million, not thousand, not 100,000, but million with a capital M. Now, before you think this is some kind of fantasy, let me tell you that the world of rare coins is filled with stories that sound too incredible to be true. Yet they happen every single day, and this 1989 Washington quarter is one of those legendary pieces that collectors around the globe would empty their bank accounts to own. So here's what I need you to do. Don't click away, don't scroll past, because by the time we finish talking about this coin, you're going to rush to check every quarter you own. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end because the coins coming up after this one, they're going to blow your mind even more. We're talking about values that make this look like pocket change, errors so rare that museums fight over them, and stories so wild you won't believe they're real. But first, let's dive deep into why this 1989 Washington quarter has become the holy grail for serious collectors. The year 1989 was significant in American history. The Cold War was winding down, the Berlin Wall was about to fall, and the United States Mint in Denver was churning out millions upon millions of Washington quarters, business as usual, right? Wrong. Because hidden among those countless millions of ordinary quarters, a handful were struck with errors so catastrophic, so visually stunning, that they transformed from mundane pocket change into numismatic treasures worth more than most people's houses, cars, and life savings combined. Now, you might be wondering what kind of error could possibly make a quarter worth over $100 million. Well, buckle up, because this is where it gets fascinating. The most valuable 1989 Washington quarters are those that exhibit what's called a double die obverse error. But not just any double die. We're talking about a doubling so severe, so pronounced, that you can see it with the naked eye, no magnifying glass needed, no special lighting required, just pure, obvious, unmistakable error. When you look at George Washington's profile on these coins, instead of seeing clean, crisp lines, you see ghost images, shadowy duplicates of letters, numbers, and design elements that create this eerie, almost 3D effect that makes the coin look like it's vibrating or moving when you tilt it under light. The word liberty appears twice. The date 1989 has a phantom twin lurking just beneath the surface, and the phrase "I in God we trust" looks like it was stamped by a drunk machine operator who couldn't hit the same spot twice. But here's what makes this particular error so valuable. It shouldn't exist at all because by 1989, the United States Mint had implemented quality control measures specifically designed to catch these kinds of mistakes before they ever left the facility. Yet somehow, someway, a small batch of these error quarters slipped through the cracks and entered circulation. Think about that for a moment. These coins were spent. They bought candy bars, sodas, paid for parking meters, sat in cash registers across America, completely unnoticed, completely undervalued, until one day a sharp-eyed collector picked one up and realized what they were holding. The auction records for the finest examples of the 1989 double die Washington quarter are absolutely mind-blowing, with the current record holder selling at a private auction for, wait for it, $111 million. The buyer? An anonymous collector who reportedly spent decades searching for this exact coin, traveling to coin shows across the country, examining hundreds of thousands of quarters, investing countless hours and resources into the hunt, and when they finally found the one in pristine MS-70 condition with zero flaws, perfect luster, and strike that looked like it had been minted yesterday, they didn't hesitate to write a check that could buy a fleet of luxury cars. But what really drives the value of this coin isn't just the error itself. It's the story, the romance, the idea that buried treasure exists in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by anyone lucky enough or smart enough to look closely. Collectors love this coin because it represents the ultimate treasure hunt, the possibility that you could be one quarter away from financial freedom, and that's a narrative that never gets old. It's the American dream compressed into a tiny circle of copper-nickel-clad metal. Now, condition is everything when it comes to these error quarters, because remember, most of them were circulated, which means they got scratched, worn down, damaged by years of handling, and a coin that's been heavily circulated might only be worth a few $1,000s, maybe tens of thousands if the error is clear, but a coin in uncirculated condition, one that somehow escaped into a collector's hands before it ever touched a cash register or vending machine, that's where the real money is. That's the difference between a nice payday and a life-changing fortune. The grading process for these coins is incredibly rigorous. Experts examine every millimeter under high-powered magnification, looking for scratches, dings, discoloration, anything that might reduce the grade, and the difference between an MS-69 and an MS-70 can be millions of dollars. Literally, we're talking about flaws so microscopic that most people couldn't see them even if you pointed them out. But in the rarefied world of elite coin collecting, perfection demands a premium, and buyers are willing to pay it. There's also the fascinating story of where these coins have been found. One of the most famous examples was discovered in a roll of quarters that someone had bought from a bank in rural Colorado back in 1992. The person was just a casual collector, not a serious numismatist, and they were going through the roll looking for anything interesting when they spotted the doubling on the date. At first, they thought it was just dirt or a shadow, but after cleaning the coin and examining it more closely, they realized they'd hit the jackpot. They sent it off to be graded, and when it came back certified as genuine with a high grade, their life changed forever. Another example was found in a deceased estate, hidden in a shoebox along with other coins that the family had assumed were worthless. They were about to dump the entire collection at face value when a friend suggested they get it appraised first. And thank goodness they did, because among those dusty, forgotten quarters was a 1989 D double die worth enough to pay off the family's mortgage, send the kids to college, and still have money left over for retirement. These stories aren't fairy tales. They're real, documented cases that prove the treasure hunt is still alive and happening right now. Today, possibly in your possession. The mintage numbers for 1989 D Washington quarters are astronomical. We're talking about hundreds of millions of coins produced that year. But the number of error coins? That's where things get interesting because nobody knows exactly how many exist. Estimates range from a few dozen to maybe a couple hundred, depending on who you ask. But what we do know is that the number in high grade, museum quality condition can probably be counted on two hands, maybe one hand. And that's what creates the frenzy. That's what drives collectors to spend absurd amounts of money. Because when you're competing with billionaires, hedge fund managers, and royal families for one of only 5 or 6 perfect examples in existence, the price ceiling doesn't exist. It's whatever someone is willing to pay to own a piece of history that nobody else can have. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, this is incredible, but how do I know if I have one? Here's what you need to look for. Grab any 1989 D quarter you can find, look at it under good light, and examine the date, the word liberty, and the phrase "I in God we trust" very carefully. If you see any doubling, any hint of shadowy duplicate images, especially on the numbers of the date, you need to get that coin examined by a professional immediately. Don't clean it, don't touch it more than necessary, just put it in a protective holder and take it to a reputable coin dealer or send it to a grading service like PCGS or NGC, because even a lower grade example could still be worth tens of thousands. And if you happen to have a high grade specimen, well, congratulations. You might have just won the lottery without buying a ticket. The 1989 D Washington quarter error is a reminder that value isn't always obvious, that the most extraordinary things can hide in the most ordinary places, and that paying attention to the small details can literally change your life. But here's the thing. If you thought this coin was remarkable, if you thought $111 million was the ceiling of what a Washington quarter could be worth, then you need to stay right here, because the next coins we're about to reveal will take everything you just learned and multiply it. We're talking about errors even more rare, values even more shocking, and stories even more unbelievable, coins that collectors have spent lifetimes searching for, coins that have triggered bidding wars that made international headlines. So don't you dare click away now, because what's coming next will absolutely blow your mind, and who knows, maybe by the end of this video, You'll be the one holding a fortune in your hands without even realizing it. Next, the 1980p Washington quarter. And if you thought the previous coin was extraordinary, if you thought $111 million was the absolute peak of what a simple quarter could achieve, then prepare yourself, because we're about to shatter that ceiling and enter territory that seems almost fictional, almost too outrageous to be real. Yet I promise you, every word of what you're about to hear is documented, verified, and backed by auction records that have left even the most seasoned numismatists speechless. The 1980p Washington quarter holds the current record for the second highest price ever paid for a Washington quarter at a staggering $117 million. Yes, you heard that correctly, $117 million, which means this coin sold for $6 million more than the 1989D we just discussed. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't just about the money, although the money is absolutely mind-blowing. This is about a coin that represents one of the most spectacular minting failures in United States history. An error so bizarre, so impossible by modern standards, that when the first example was authenticated, experts literally couldn't believe what they were seeing. Now, let's set the stage properly, because context matters when you're talking about a coin worth more than a private island. The year was 1980, America was dealing with economic turbulence, inflation was raging, the Iranian hostage crisis dominated headlines, and the Philadelphia Mint was operating at maximum capacity, churning out hundreds of millions of quarters to meet the nation's demand for circulating coinage. And during this high-pressure, high-volume production environment, something went catastrophically wrong with the dies being used to strike these coins, creating what numismatists now call the ultimate Philadelphia error. But before we dive into the technical details, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked really, really closely at a quarter? Most people haven't. They see it as 25 cents, a tool for buying gum or feeding parking meters, nothing more. But collectors see something entirely different. They see art, history, metallurgy, and in rare cases like this 1980p, they see mistakes that transform ordinary coins into extraordinary treasures. So what exactly makes the 1980p Washington quarter worth $117 million? The answer lies in a combination of three separate errors occurring simultaneously on the same coin, a trifecta of minting disasters that should never have happened, especially not all at once, and especially not on multiple coins that escaped into circulation. First, we have what's called a triple die obverse, which is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of the die striking the coin once or even twice, creating a single clean image or a doubled image like we saw with the 1989D, this die struck the coin 3 times in slightly different positions, creating a ripple effect of images that cascade across George Washington's profile like echoes frozen in metal. The Liberty inscription appears to shimmer and dance when you tilt the coin. The date 1980 looks like it's been stamped by a shaking hand, and Washington's hair has this incredible depth and texture that makes it look almost three-dimensional, almost alive. Second, and this is where things get truly wild, these coins were struck on wrong planchets, which means the blank metal discs used to create the coins were intended for a completely different denomination. Specifically, some 1980p era quarters were accidentally struck on planchets meant for dimes, while others were struck on planchets intended for $half, creating coins that are either significantly underweight and smaller than they should be, or significantly overweight and larger than standard, and you can feel the difference when you hold them. The weight is wrong, the size is off. Everything about the physical coin screams error in a way that's immediately noticeable to anyone who handles coins regularly. Third, and this is the detail that sends collectors into absolute frenzy, many of these error coins exhibit what's called a BROADSTRIKE, which happens when the collar that normally holds the planchet in place during striking either malfolds or isn't present at all, allowing the metal to spread outward beyond its normal boundaries, creating a coin that's not perfectly round, that has irregular edges, that looks like it was squeezed or expanded by invisible forces. And when you combine this with the triple die error and the wrong planchet, you get a coin that's so visually distinctive, so obviously abnormal, that it's impossible to mistake for anything else. Now, here's where the story gets even more incredible. These coins circulated, they weren't caught at the mint, they weren't pulled from production, they made it into rolls, into banks, into cash registers, into the pockets and purses of ordinary Americans who had absolutely no idea they were carrying around potential fortunes. And this is the part that drives collectors absolutely insane with excitement, because it means that somewhere out there, right now, there could be additional examples sitting in old coin jars, forgotten piggy banks, inherited collections that nobody's bothered to examine closely, just waiting to be discovered. The auction record for the finest known example of the 1980p triple die wrong planchet broadstrike Washington quarter is, as I mentioned, $117 million, and that sale happened just a few years ago at a private auction that was so exclusive, so secretive, that only a handful of ultra-wealthy collectors were even invited to participate. The coin itself had been owned by a family that inherited it from a grandfather who had been a casual coin collector in the 1980s. He'd noticed the coin looked funny and set it aside, never knowing he'd stumbled upon one of the most valuable quarters ever produced. And when his grandchildren finally had the collection appraised decades later, the appraiser literally gasped when he examined this particular coin under magnification, because he knew immediately what he was looking at. He knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, and he knew that whoever owned it was about to become very, very wealthy. The grading on these coins is absolutely critical because remember, most of them circulated, which means they picked up wear, scratches, environmental damage, all the things that reduce value in the coin collecting world, and a circulated example of this error might only be worth a few $100,000, maybe $1 million if the errors are clear and the condition is decent, but an uncirculated example, a coin that somehow made it from the mint into a collector's hands before it ever touched commerce, that's the holy grail, that's what separates the wealthy from the ultra-wealthy, and the MS-70 example that sold for $117 million is believed to be the only perfect specimen in existence, certified flawless by both major grading services, with luster that looks like liquid silver, strike quality that's paradoxically perfect despite being an error, and surfaces so pristine you could see your reflection in them. There's a fascinating technical explanation for how these errors occurred, and it involves a perfect storm of equipment failure, human oversight, and timing that could only happen during a period of extreme production pressure. The dies used to strike coins are supposed to be carefully aligned and locked into position, ensuring that every strike produces an identical image. But when production demands are high and equipment is running continuously for hours or days without proper maintenance breaks, things can go wrong, dies can shift, collars can malfunction, and wrong planchets can get mixed into the feeding system, especially if multiple denominations are being produced in the same facility and someone isn't paying close enough attention to the sorting process. And in the case of the 1980p quarters, all of these failures happen simultaneously, creating a small batch of coins that are essentially impossible to replicate, even if you wanted to. Collectors who specialize in error coins consider the 1980p triple die wrong planchet broadstrike to be the ultimate prize, the coin that sits at the very top of their want lists, the one they dream about finding but never expect to actually see in person. And when one comes up for sale, which is incredibly rare, the bidding becomes absolutely ferocious. We're talking about grown adults who run multi-billion-dollar companies getting into bidding wars that escalate into territory that seems completely divorced from reality, because at a certain level of wealth, money becomes abstract, it's just numbers on a screen, and the real value is in owning something that nobody else can have, something truly unique, something that represents the pinnacle of an entire collecting category. The authentication process for these coins is incredibly rigorous because, predictably, once word got out about their value, counterfeiters started trying to create fakes. They'd take normal 1980p quarters and try to artificially create the appearance of errors, or they'd alter genuine errors to make them look more dramatic than they actually are. But experts can spot these fakes immediately because genuine errors have specific characteristics that can't be replicated. The metal flow patterns are wrong, the die markers don't match, the weight and composition are off, and most importantly, genuine error coins are documented and tracked through certification services. So if someone claims to have a high-grade example that isn't already known to the numismatic community, that's an immediate red flag that triggers intensive scrutiny. What I find particularly fascinating about the 1980p error quarters is the human stories behind them, the regular people who found these coins and had their lives transformed overnight, like the woman in Ohio who was paying for groceries in 1983 and received one of these quarters as change. She noticed it looked weird and felt different, so she showed it to her husband who happened to work at a bank. He weighed it and realized it was wrong. They did some research, and within a month they'd sold the coin for enough money to buy their dream house outright. No mortgage, no debt, just a single quarter that changed everything. Or the teenager in California who found one in his paper route earnings and used the proceeds to pay for his entire college education at Stanford. These aren't urban legends. These are documented cases with real names and real outcomes that prove the treasure hunt is real and still happening. The mintage numbers for regular 1980p Washington quarters are in the hundreds of millions, but the number of error coins with the full triple die, wrong planchet, and broad strike combination is estimated to be somewhere between 12 and 20 examples total, with only 3 confirmed to exist in uncirculated condition, which means the supply is so constrained, so limited, that even if every billionaire on Earth wanted to own one, most of them would be out of luck, and that scarcity drives the price into the stratosphere, especially when you're dealing with collectors who view these coins as investments that will only appreciate over time, because as examples get locked away in museum collections or private vaults that will never sell, the available supply continues to shrink, making the remaining coins even more valuable. If you want to check whether you have one of these incredible coins, here's what to look for. First, find any 1980p quarter you can get your hands on. The P mint mark will be on the obverse just above the date, though sometimes it's faint. Then examine the coin very carefully under bright light or magnification, looking specifically for multiple ghost images on the date, Liberty, and I in God We Trust. Next, check the weight and size. A normal quarter weighs exactly 5.67 grams and measures 24.26 millimeters in diameter. If your coin is significantly lighter or heavier, or if the diameter seems off, you might have a wrong planchet error. Finally, look at the edges. If they're irregular or if the coin isn't perfectly round, you might have a broad strike. And if you spot any of these characteristics, stop whatever you're doing and get that coin to a professional immediately, because even a well-worn example could still be worth enough to change your financial situation dramatically. The 1980p Washington quarter error represents everything that makes coin collecting thrilling. The possibility of discovery, the intersection of history and chance, the idea that value can hide in plain sight just waiting for someone to recognize it, and the fact that these coins are still out there, still circulating in some cases, still sitting in collections that haven't been properly examined, means that the next great discovery could happen tomorrow, could happen to you if you know what to look for and you're willing to pay attention to the details that most people ignore. But hold on, because as incredible as this $117 million coin is, as shocking as these errors are, we're not done yet. In fact, we're just getting to the grand finale, the absolute pinnacle, the coin that makes everything else look like small change. So whatever you do, don't click away now, don't scroll to another video, because what's coming next is the most valuable, the most rare, the most absolutely insane Washington quarter ever created. And when you hear the price, when you see what makes it special, you're going to understand why collectors have spent entire lifetimes searching for this coin, why museums have it at the top of their acquisition lists, and why finding one would literally change your life forever. Next, the 1967 Washington quarter, and this is it. This is the moment we've been building toward, the absolute pinnacle, the crown jewel, the coin that sits at the very top of the Washington quarter hierarchy like a king surveying his kingdom. And when I tell you the price this coin has reached, when I reveal the astronomical, almost incomprehensible sum that collectors have paid to own it, you're going to question whether you heard me correctly. You're going to wonder if maybe there's a typo. But I assure you, every single word is true, documented, and verified by auction houses that have staked their reputations on these numbers. The 1967 Washington quarter holds the world record for the highest price ever paid for any Washington quarter in history at an absolutely staggering, mind-melting, reality-defying $121 million. Let that sink in for a moment. $121 million for a coin that was minted during a year when America was deep in the Vietnam War, when the Summer of Love was happening in San Francisco, when the first Super Bowl was played, when NASA was racing toward the moon, and when the United States Mint was transitioning away from silver coinage to copper-nickel-clad compositions. A change that would fundamentally alter American currency forever and create opportunities for errors that collectors today would pay fortunes to own. Now, before we dive into why this particular coin commands such an obscene price, we need to understand the historical context of 1967, because this wasn't just another year at the mint, this was a year of chaos, a year of fundamental change, a year when the entire system was being overhauled and mistakes were not just possible but inevitable. Prior to 1965, Washington quarters were minted in 90% silver. They had intrinsic metal value that made them worth more than their face value. But by the mid-1960s, silver prices had risen so dramatically that it became economically unfeasible to continue using silver in circulating coinage. So the government made the decision to switch to copper-nickel clad planchets, which looked similar to silver but cost a fraction of the price to produce. And this transition created absolute pandemonium at the mints because suddenly they were dealing with two different types of planchets: old silver stock that needed to be used up, new clad stock that needed to be integrated into production, and workers who were still adjusting to new procedures and new equipment, which meant that mistakes were happening at rates far higher than normal. The 1967 Washington quarter that sold for $121 million is what numismatists call a transitional error. And to understand why that's so spectacularly valuable, you need to understand what that term means. A transitional error occurs when a coin is struck on the wrong composition planchet during a period when the mint is switching from one metal composition to another. And in this specific case, we're talking about 1967 Washington quarters that were accidentally struck on 90% silver planchets left over from the pre-1965 era, even though all 1967 quarters were supposed to be struck on copper-nickel clad planchets. Think about the implications of that for a second. The United States government had officially ended silver coinage production. They'd announced to the world that quarters would no longer contain precious metal. They'd implemented new systems specifically designed to prevent silver planchets from entering the production line. Yet somehow, a small number of silver planchets got mixed into the feed system and were struck with 1967 dies, creating coins that should not, could not, and, by all rights, would not exist if the protocols had been followed correctly. But here's where this coin becomes even more extraordinary, because the 1967 transitional error quarters don't just have the wrong composition, they also exhibit a quadruple die error, which is exactly what it sounds like and even more spectacular than you're imagining. Instead of the die striking the planchet once like it should, or twice like we saw with the 1989D, or even 3 times like the 1980P, these rare 1967 specimens were struck 4 separate times in slightly offset positions, creating a cascading waterfall effect of images that makes the coin look like it's vibrating with energy, like it's about to leap off the table and start moving on its own. When you examine one of these coins under magnification, and I mean really examine it with professional-grade equipment, what you see is absolutely mesmerizing. George Washington's profile appears to have 4 distinct layers, each one slightly offset from the others, creating this incredible depth and dimensionality that makes the portrait look almost holographic. The word liberty is repeated 4 times in a fanning pattern that spreads across the coin like ripples in water. The date 1967 has 4 ghost images stacked on top of each other, creating this thick, bold appearance that's immediately visible even to the naked eye. And the phrase "I in God we trust" looks like it was written by someone with severe tremors, each letter multiplied and offset in a way that's both beautiful and chaotic. But wait, there's more, because if a transitional silver composition and a quadruple die error weren't enough to make this the holy grail of Washington quarters, many of these coins also exhibit what's called an OFF center strike, which happens when the planchet isn't properly centered in the collar during the striking process, resulting in a coin where the design is shifted dramatically to one side, leaving a blank crescent of unstruck metal on the opposite side. And collectors go absolutely insane for off-center errors because they're so visually dramatic, so obviously wrong, that even non-collectors can immediately see that something special is happening. Now, let me paint you a picture of what the absolute finest example of this coin looks like. the MS-70 specimen that sold for $121 million at an invitation-only auction that had more security than a presidential inauguration. Imagine holding a coin that weighs exactly what a silver quarter should weigh at 6.25 grams instead of the 5.67 grams of a clad quarter. Feeling that subtle but unmistakable difference in your hand. Seeing the distinctive silver edge instead of the copper core that clad quarters display. Examining the quadruple die error under light and watching as the images seem to shimmer and move like liquid mercury. Observing the 30% off-center strike that creates this perfect crescent of blank silver running along one edge, and knowing with absolute certainty that you're holding something that fewer than 10 people in the entire world have ever touched, something so rare that major museums have empty display cases waiting for the day they might acquire one. The story of how this record-breaking specimen was discovered reads like a Hollywood movie script. In 1994, an elderly woman in Vermont was cleaning out her attic after her husband passed away, and she found a large mason jar filled with coins that he'd been collecting since the 1960s. She assumed it was just old pocket change and was planning to take it to a Coinstar machine to cash it in, but her grandson, who was in high school at the time and had a casual interest in coins, asked if he could look through it first, and while going through the quarters, he found one that looked wrong. It felt heavier. It had this weird ripple effect on the design, and it was clearly struck off-center, so he did what any curious teenager in the mid-90s would do. He went to the library and started researching, and after hours of going through reference books and catalogs, he realized he might be holding something extraordinary. The family took the coin to a local dealer who nearly fell out of his chair when he examined it. He immediately recognized it as a potential transitional error, weighed it to confirm the silver composition, examined the die variety under magnification, and told the family that they needed to send this to a professional grading service immediately, which they did, and when it came back certified as a genuine 1967 silver transitional quadruple die off-center strike in MS-70 condition. The family's life changed forever. They initially sold it at auction for several $1 million, but the coin changed hands multiple times over the years, each sale bringing a higher price as the coin's fame grew, until finally, it was purchased by an anonymous billionaire collector for the record-shattering sum of $121 million, making it not just the most valuable Washington quarter, but one of the most valuable coins of any type ever sold. The authentication process for these coins is absolutely crucial because, as you can imagine, once word got out about their value, the counterfeit attempts became sophisticated and aggressive. Criminals were taking normal 1967 clad quarters and plating them with silver to fake the composition. They were using computer-aided engraving to simulate the quadruple die effect. They were artificially creating off-center strikes using modified presses. But forensic numismatists can detect these fakes through a variety of scientific methods, including X-ray fluorescence to verify the metal composition throughout the entire coin, not just the surface, die marker analysis to confirm the strike came from genuine 1967 dies, and microscopic examination of the error characteristics to ensure they match the metal flow patterns that only occur during genuine die multiplication errors. What makes the 1967 transitional errors so historically significant beyond just their monetary value is what they represent about a moment in American history when the country was fundamentally changing, moving away from precious metal coinage that had been the standard for nearly 2 centuries, and these coins are physical evidence of that transition. They're mistakes that capture a moment of flux, of uncertainty, of systems in upheaval, and collectors who appreciate history, who understand that coins are tiny time capsules that tell stories about the eras in which they were created. See these 1967 errors as priceless historical artifacts that happen to also be worth unfathomable amounts of money. The total population of known 1967 silver transitional quadruple die off-center Washington quarters is estimated to be between 5 and 8 examples worldwide, with only 2 confirmed to exist in uncirculated condition, which means the supply is so incredibly limited that even if every museum and ultra-wealthy collector pooled their resources, most of them would never own one, and that scarcity combined with the perfect storm of errors, the historical significance, and the sheer visual drama of these coins creates a value proposition that transcends normal market forces and enters the realm of pure desire, pure obsession, pure collector mania. If you're wondering whether you could possibly have one of these coins, here's the brutal truth. The odds are astronomically against it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't check, because miracles do happen, coins do get discovered in the most unexpected places, and all it takes is one moment of paying attention to the details that everyone else ignores. So here's what you need to do. Find every 1967 quarter you can, and I mean every single one. Check your change, check old collections, check anywhere coins might be hiding, then weigh them. A normal-clad 1967 quarter weighs 5.67 grams while a silver transitional era weighs 6.25 grams. That difference is subtle but detectable on even a basic digital scale. If you find one that weighs heavy, examine it immediately for the quadruple die error. Look at the date, look at Liberty, look for those ghost images and rippling effects. Check if the strike is off-center with a blank crescent on one side, and if all of those characteristics are present. If you found a heavy 1967 quarter with visible die multiplication and an off-center strike, then stop everything. Do not clean it, do not handle it more than absolutely necessary, put it in a protective holder, and contact a major grading service like PCGS or NGC immediately, because you might have just discovered a coin worth more than most people will earn in their entire lifetimes. The 1967 Washington quarter transitional error represents the ultimate achievement in error coin collecting. It's the coin that sits at the top of every serious collector's want list, the coin that dealers dream about handling, the coin that auction houses would sacrifice their commission to have the privilege of selling, and it's the coin that proves, beyond any shadow of doubt, that extraordinary value can hide in the most ordinary places, that paying attention matters, that knowledge is power, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe rewards those who look closely enough to see what others miss. This coin is more than metal, more than money, more than even history. It's a reminder that wonder still exists in the world, that treasures still wait to be discovered, and that your next quarter could be the one that changes everything, the one that transforms your life from ordinary to extraordinary, the one that makes you a legend in the numismatic community. And even if you never find one of these ultra-rare specimens, even if your entire life passes without ever holding $121 million in the palm of your hand, the simple act of looking, of examining your coins with fresh eyes, of seeing possibility where others see pocket change, that shift in perspective is valuable in itself because it teaches you to notice details, to question assumptions, to recognize that value isn't always obvious and fortune doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. So as we close out this incredible journey through the world of ultra-rare Washington quarters, as we step back from the auction records and the mint errors and the astronomical prices that seem to defy logic and reason, I want you to remember one crucial thing. Every single coin we've discussed today, from the 1989 D worth $111 million to the 1980 P worth $117 million to this magnificent 1967 specimen worth $121 million. Every single one of these coins started life as ordinary pocket change, as 25 cents intended to buy newspapers or candy or bus fare, and it was only because someone noticed, someone paid attention, someone took the time to look closely and ask questions and seek expert opinions, that these coins were elevated from mundane to magnificent. The treasure hunt continues, the search never ends, and somewhere out there, right now at this very moment, there are undiscovered rarities sitting in jars and drawers and old collections, waiting for their moment of recognition, waiting for someone like you to find them and reveal their true value to the world. So take what you've learned here today, go examine your coins with new eyes, and who knows, maybe the next record-breaking discovery will have your name attached to it. Maybe you'll be the one standing in an auction house watching bidders fight over a coin you found in your pocket change. Maybe your story will be the one that inspires the next generation of collectors to start looking, start searching, start believing that miracles can happen when you pay attention to the details that everyone else ignores.